Welcome back to the Fly Culture Podcast, your weekly look inside the world of fly fishing presented by Pete Tigers. If you're enjoying listening, please consider subscribing.
From his base in Scotland, Will Shaw spends his time casting flies to trout, salmon and pike. His fishing timeline is fascinating, and it's one that starts in Manchester, ends in Scotland and goes via Christmas Island, Montana and Cape Cod, amongst many other venues too. He's also a casting instructor who's interested in understanding how people pick up physical skills like fly casting. As you can see, there is plenty to cover, so we'll jump straight in. Will, welcome to the Fly Culture Podcast. How are you doing?
I'm really good, Pete. Really good. I'm slightly tired. I walked absolute miles yesterday through the snow trying to find some grayling, unsuccessfully. But I had a great day.
Fantastic. And there's sort of, one of my questions I was thinking of asking you was as we get a little bit older, we sort of pick and choose those moments to go fishing. But it's clearly the case that you haven't done, that you're still hitting it pretty hard. And it sounds like pretty extreme conditions as well.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't done a lot of winter fishing lately, but I felt the need after Christmas just to get out. And I'll tell you what I enjoyed the most. I was out on Thursday and Friday, and just being out in the weather was just fantastic. Just feeling the frost and the wind. And yesterday I was in a blizzard, driving through the hills to get to the river, walking through the snow with all the, how the snow sticks to the soles of your wading boots, and you end up with like 8-inch platforms. So having to kick the snow off every kind of 10 yards. But yeah, it was good fun. I caught some fish on Thursday as well, which was a nice thing to kick the year off anyway. So yeah.
Fantastic. And that's nice, like you say, to throw off the shackles of winter and the excesses of Christmas and everything else that has gone with it, and a nice way to get going as well. I'm sort of, I know we were talking off mic, and I'm still sort of waiting for that moment to choose it. The rivers, my excuse anyway about the lack of fishing is purely the rivers are too high and I just cannot fish them at the moment. So I don't feel like I'm missing out at the moment, but I'm sort of mentally preparing myself for how quick and short February is. And then we're sort of almost there. Yeah. Although I'm sort of looking, and I don't know if you're the same, that I'm sort of our rivers, and I think yours are slightly different in Scotland, certainly. But, where I am in Devon, that the stream I fish most of the time, early season is not really happening. And even last year, I'm looking at Granham in April. And again, I know you get those a little bit later. But I know... April is usually the time I'm starting to see some rising fish. Last year wasn't because of that cold start that we got through. But I'm finding now that I'm sort of spending more time salmon fishing during that time, waiting for that right moment. Are you doing sort of similar? But I guess possibly not so, because your rivers do light up a little bit sooner, don't they?
Yeah. So yeah, as we'll probably get onto, I've kind of got into salmon fishing in the last few years. So I'm kind of looking forward to my local river opens at the end of the month. So February, I'm going to be out trying to get a springer. So that'll be fun. But I'll look forward to the trout season. And yeah, I think last year the hatches weren't brilliant very early on, March, April, but there were fish moving. So we managed to get fish sporadically, and it kind of for me I think April can be fantastic when we get large dark olives coming through in numbers, March browns if you're in the right place at the right time, that can be brilliant stuff, and I think for me I've probably done best April, May has always been my kind of peak times on the rivers up here. Yeah. That's when you kind of really get a nice combination of good river conditions and good hatches. Yeah.
And I guess May for you is more where I'm thinking about mayfly, certainly back end. May for you is probably more Granham, isn't it?
It depends on the river. So the Tweed can have some really good Granham hatches, seen some real, the old-fashioned blizzard hatches. But some of the other rivers, surprisingly enough, I've not really seen much Granham and you're into olives all the way through. So it depends on the river, I think. But it's lovely when you do get those. Yeah, I mean those kind of big blizzard Granham hatches. Well, the last few years I've been frustrated when you watching blizzard Granham hatches standing there with a salmon rod in my hand.
Yeah,
surrounded by trout. Yeah.
I've been there. Funnily enough, I was telling somebody about it yesterday that Emma and I were fishing for salmon, and it was a similar our Granham hatch last year. And I think, funnily enough, the hatches as a whole were really good. Mayfly was not outstanding, but the rest were pretty good. But I remember, I know Warren will be listening, that we were on the my home river when there was a Granham hatch, and he said he'd never seen one like it. But I remember a day or two before or after, I can't remember now, I was swinging flies for salmon with Emma, and we stopped and waited and sat on the bank for about an hour just talking and watching. I said, God, there's a chance somebody will rise. That's my indicator hatch for rising fish, the Granham, that, we get the large darks and everything else, those early season ephemera hatches, but the fish don't really eat them. There's been very, very few occasions where I've seen them rise to that. But we sat for a good hour and a half, and I thought, this is it, we're going to see something. And nothing. And that was the story of it for me last year. I don't know if you look back on your season as a whole, how you think about it, but that was kind of it. And it took a lot of getting going. Was it similar for you last year?
I think it was. Well, yeah, I mean, for me, the big story on my local river last year was just no water. We just had low levels. It was just painful. And so most of the fish, I had a really nice, so I spent a lot of the spring salmon fishing and watching trout rise when I didn't have the right kit with me. But I had some really nice days in May, June, fishing upstream spiders in the stickles, in the riffles, and just had some lovely afternoons doing that. And it's not something that I've done a lot of. Which was so it was just nice to kind of get my game going with that. Just lovely stuff, and just and I guess in those kind of low water conditions, it's just nice to be in those riffles, isn't it? There's it's the only bit of the river where there's any energy. Everything else is like really, there's loads of weed and algae around. So just being in the fast water and picking up fish, I really love that. Yeah.
Nice. And that's a lovely thing about this, isn't it, with your experience and everything else that you do, that we can still find something that we're continually learning or refining or enjoying. And I think that's probably, for me, why I keep coming back to it, because there's always something new that I'm thinking about or experiencing. And, I think that's great to hear those sorts of things. And stepping outside the comfort zone is always a good thing to do and test you as an angler, doesn't it, as well?
Yeah. The funny thing I did last year was I made it ages ago, like years ago. I decided I was going to make a fly line out of horsehair. And so I bought, you can buy horsehair for violin bows, which is all about, probably a bit less than a meter long each hair. And I looked it up on the internet about how to taper a fly line with horsehair. And it took me hours to do it. I made it. It was about 30 feet long in the end, this thing. And it tapered from about maybe 10 horsehairs down to 2. And I'd made it, and then I didn't use it. I just kind of put it aside. And I thought last year, I'm just going to bloody use that thing. So got it out. And I have to say, it cast beautifully. It was probably like a kind of a heavy-ish French leader, but with a bit more mass to it. And it just cast wonderfully. And I caught a few trout on it, which I was really pleased, really, really pleased to do. But then it gave up the ghost. I don't think I'd made it well enough. It started kind of fraying and all, falling apart. So I retired it after a few fish. But that's, a great example of there's just so many, so many rabbit holes you can disappear down. You suddenly find yourself sat in front of the telly weaving horsehair. It's an example of what we get up to.
I think that's fantastic. All I can picture in my mind is next to your fly rods, you've got all these old violin bows with no hair on them, basically, and what you're going to do with those. So that would be interesting.
Yeah.
But funnily enough, I had a lovely conversation with a gentleman in Holland yesterday, Robert, and we got talking about bamboo rods. And I'm looking now, actually, I can see, he said, do you use silk lines? I said, no. And I've got a Phoenix line sitting here. I've got a load of old ones somewhere or other, and I never got round to using them. And he said, well, why not? And I said, well, I kind of like modern fly lines and an old method of building a rod, although they're obviously new rods. And I kind of like that mix between the two. And even with a bamboo rod, a modern reel, I kind of like that. I do fish some of the older reels as well, but I really like that sort of mix between the two, and they work really well for me. So I've just not got round to it, but I'm, like I say, I'm looking at it now thinking, oh, perhaps I should get some red muslin and give it a go at some stage, but I just haven't got the patience to keep treating the line, or like you say, knotting a horsehair leader together and everything else. But I know when we were chatting before, you said, and you said a little bit there about salmon, and that's become, I think I'm kind of like you in the sense that my real first love, if I had to do it, would be trout. But then I've fished more and more over the last 10, 15 years for salmon as well, and they've become an important part of my fishing for many reasons for me. Is that been a similar sort of thing? And where did you go down that journey with salmon, and why did that become more interesting to you as well?
Well, I think being in Scotland is a good start, I think. So previous to that, I'd lived in northwest England and then in London. So, wasn't exactly handy for lots of salmon. So being in Scotland, but it took me a while, I think. I think before I moved to Scotland, my impression of salmon fishing was that it's for really, really, really rich people, and no one ever catches anything. Actually meeting people when I came to Scotland who actually salmon fished and who caught fish, it's kind of gradually seeped in that, maybe I should try this. And then also, I think watching people spey casting with two-handers as well is an inspiring thing to see. And I think those two things of actually talking to people who'd caught a salmon last week and knowing some really nice spey casters, that's kind of what's really pulled me in bit by bit. And I kind of started off thinking, I'll buy a little two-hander just to see what it's all about, and might as well learn about it. And 5 years down the track, I've got like a room full of double-handers, bags full of lines, and so been sucked in. Yeah, I found it. I have to say, so I've loved the casting. I've loved learning to use a two-hander. That's been great fun and a huge challenge, especially left hand up, which has been monumental. So there's that. But I found the actual fishing, learning how to salmon fish, really hard. I think in a situation where there aren't a lot of fish around, which there aren't nowadays, it's really difficult to get kind of feedback from the fish as to whether what you're doing is right or not. How do you know if you're fishing too fast or too slow if there are no fish there? How do you know if your fly is too big or too small if there are no fish there? All of that is really hard. And I think that it's so. The good thing is I feel like I've got years and years left to learn this stuff. It's not like you just press a few buttons and you've got it. If you want to learn it properly, it's a lifetime. It's like all of it, I guess. So, but yeah.
It's
I just love the learning bit, Pete.
Yeah, I can see that, when you said about the horsehair and everything else, I can see why salmon would be a natural progression from a casting perspective, from the lines as well. And so I get that aspect of it. And I think it is with the fishing now that it is different. You can't just sort of make the cast, swing the line round and then step down and do the same. And you do have to think things. And then I worry about that too, that I'm overthinking it. Do I need to change this? Do I need to change that? Because we haven't got a lot to go at. And the last day on our home river, Emma and I, the river couldn't have been more perfect, yet there was nothing, but you end up overthinking stuff because you haven't got anything to go at to say, is this right? Is this wrong? And very often when it is there, I'll step right out of the norm just to see. But, it would be kind of cool to have a few more to play with, and hopefully things may change. Who knows? So, I can only keep my fingers crossed, but we won't go down that wormhole. It's interesting what you said about left hand up as well. And the podcast I did with Peter Morse, that he was talking about that, and he'd just practiced for about a month just with his left hand up on the double hander and had been doing a hell of a lot of that. So it does that muscle memory, which will go into casting a little bit at some stages, is really key, isn't it? And using your non-dominant side, you learn a lot about your dominant side as well, don't you?
Yeah. And it's fascinating that I think not only is it that your left hand is not used to being the dominant side, is your right hand is not used to being the non-dominant side. So my right hand tries to take over too much. And so both sides are having to learn a new role. I don't think it's not as simple as just, so I'm single-handed, I'm reasonably decent left-handed. But when you've got to use both hands in conjunction, both sides have to learn something new. And that's the challenge. Yeah.
Cool. We should come on to that shortly, but I want to drill down your fishing timeline. And like you say, you're in the Northwest, and you started fishing at 8. Can you sort of remember that experience? And did anything begin there? Where was that moment where fishing for you realised how special it was, amongst many other things I guess you were probably doing?
Yeah. So I think probably it started before 8, because my dad was a fisherman. So he was a coarse fisherman and a fly fisherman, still is. He's like 91, still going. So I always remember from a very early age, Dad coming home from fishing, and if he'd been trout fishing, he might have brought a couple of brown trout with him, and watching him clean them, and just being fascinated by the kit and all of that. I could just remember that from really early age. And then we went on holiday to the Isle of Arran. So the whole family went out there, and I can still remember. It's funny, just you asking me the question now. I can remember we went out on an evening and we fished from a pier, and my brother, who was younger than me, he had a little hand line, I think, and he caught a crab. I can remember him winding up a crab, and I think I was using one of Dad's spinning rods, and I caught a whiting. That was my kind of first fish, and I can remember that now. And then I can remember Mum and Dad taking us out in this little rowing boat and 4 kids. We must have just filled this kind of rowing boat and catching mackerel and codling and spur dog. And so that, for me, as an 8-year-old, that was just amazing, seeing these animals and different life. And I can remember seeing the shoals of mackerel swimming under the boat, and just blows your mind when you're an 8-year-old. It's just, fantastic. And always loved being outdoors, natural history and wildlife and stuff. Just that was always where I wanted to be. And I can remember, I've got another vivid memory of when we were going home from the Isle of Arran. I remember watching Dad put a rod into the boot of the car and thinking, I've not seen that rod before. And I think I said that to Dad. I said, oh yeah, it's one of my rods. And actually it was a rod he'd bought me for my birthday, which was coming up. And I've still got that now. I've still got this little kind of yellow solid fiberglass spinning rod. I've still got it. But I can totally remember that. And so that kind of kicked me off fishing. So if I could go with Dad any chance, my brother was a fisherman, is a fisherman as well. So all 3 of us, any chance we could get, we'd be off fishing. Mostly pond fishing for crucian carp and perch, which is, I don't get to do a lot of it nowadays up in Scotland. There's not a whole bunch of coarse fishing around, but just watching floats and all that kind of stuff, I loved it from an early age. And we just get, Dad would drop us off in the countryside, me and my friends for the day, and just leave us there until it got dark. just spending the day out, just fantastic. I think I've always loved, and it's funny talking about the salmon thing as well. I think right from the beginning, for me, the thing that's really attracted me has been the mystery of not quite knowing what's there. You've got the surface of the water and you don't know what's underneath it. And it could be, a 6-inch perch, or it could be like a 30-pound carp. And your imagination runs riot. And I think that's the same with salmon fishing. When that line goes tight, you just do not know what's on the end. And for me, I think that's the thing that keeps me going. You just never know what's going to happen next. And so, yeah, that all through my kind of teens, I think into my teens, I got into carp fishing. So that'd be late 70s, early 80s. And did a lot of carp fishing on the local ponds and lakes around there, and chub fishing on rivers, on the River Dane in Cheshire, it's a little tiny river, and just walk for miles. I've always been, even when I was carp fishing, I was never one for kind of sitting behind some buzzers and not doing anything. I always wanted to be up and out, and I was stalking fish and looking for them. And so keeping mobile, I think, has always been my thing. I remember I used to, on the River Dane, I used to take a big loaf of bread with me. And at the top of the stretch, I'd just drop in a load of floating crust and follow it downstream. And as soon as I saw the crust disappearing, I would fish a floating crust and catch a chub. And just, days like that, just loved it. And that, yeah, obviously, because Dad was a fly fisherman, we ended up fly fishing. So I probably started fly fishing 11 or 12, I think. I remember practicing in the field behind the house, trying to get decent at casting. And my brother, so he would have only been 8 or 9. And I can remember Dad thinking, he's not quite, he's not quite ready to go fly fishing. He's not big enough yet. But he was adamant. Richard, my brother, was adamant he wanted to fly fish, and pestered and pestered and pestered. And in the end, Dad gave him a fly rod. And I was gutted because my brother just took to it duck to water. It's like nothing worse as an older brother to see your younger brother pick up this rod and just start casting. And so we're all fly fishermen as well now. We'll fish for everything, I think. So that was Dad was a member of Manchester Anglers, which was it's the club that Arthur Ransom wrote a lot about in the Manchester Guardian. So the upper River Ribble, Horton in Ribblesdale. And so that was where we kind of really learned to fish for trout, catching little trout. And we always used to fish treacle parkins, little a bit like a red tag, but with a yellow tag instead. And that was, as far as we were concerned, that was the only fly worth using. We just used to fish dry flies all the time and catching wee brown trout. And it's just lovely. Just a lovely thing. And so that's kept me going, the variety of fishing. I've always kind of, I get into kind of, runs of doing one kind of fishing for maybe a season or two. And then it's okay, I'll try something else now, and you can come back to it. And so, yeah, always look for variety, I think. Yeah.
Fantastic. That sounds an idyllic childhood. Fantastic fun. And it's fascinating what you say about the treacle park in, which I remember well. I've probably got some around here somewhere or other. And it just goes to show, doesn't it? I suppose hatches and fishing was slightly different when we were younger in the state of rivers and everything else. I don't know, but I get that sense. But you didn't need lots of flies, did you? And
no.
I'm still convinced that you don't need lots of flies now. And I do feel.
I'm the same.
Do you fish the treacle parkin at all? Still,
I haven't fished it for years, but I think I'm going to have to again. It's funny. I was tying another kind of thing I did over Christmas. Was I decided to fill a wee box full of North Country wets, and one of the patterns that I chose was the smoke fly, which is it's peacock herl with, I can't remember now, a light coloured hackle, soft hackle in the middle of it. And that got me thinking, because I think that'll fish just like a treacle parkin. So it's like a little beetly looking thing. So I was actually thinking I should tie some treacle parkins and get out there again. and fish those.
Yeah. That will keep me posted with that. I'll be fascinated because I was thinking about. I watched something, or I read something about the fishing in Tasmania and the lakes and things there. That the red tag is the fly, really, isn't it, for a lot of the time? And I seem to remember going back again when Rex Hunt used to be on the TV, and he had somebody, they may have been in Tasmania, and there was the guy's guiding operation was called red tag fly fishing. So it obviously still has a great association down there. And that was seen as a grayling fly, wasn't it? A dry fly for grayling time. And, these things, sometimes it might be cool to rediscover those a little bit more and perhaps put them to use again, just to see if they work just as well as they used to do. My guess is they probably do, don't they?
I think you're right. Yeah. I'm the same as you though, Pete. So I'm a fly tyer, so I've got loads and loads of boxes of different kinds of flies, but I gravitate to probably about 4 or 5 patterns. And I know from listening to your other podcasts that people are, that seems to be a general thing, doesn't it? Is that you've got your emerger pattern, and you've got your spent spinner pattern, and a couple of nymphs, and you're away. Yeah. It's a bit depressing, really. You kind of feel as though you should be using all those hundreds of patterns that you tie.
Yeah, absolutely. I had a big cull recently, and I actually, because if anyone's been listening, they know my love of fly tying has sort of disappeared for a bit. And I had boxes and boxes just full of flies, not in lines, just in piles. And I started stripping them back with a view to, and I'm looking at them now, that some of them that I've stripped back with a view to retying them again, but I've just not got round to it. I've got loads of hooks though, and I've got loads of beads, so I'm prepared for when that may happen. But let's go back to your move away. Work, I guess, took you to London, and then you discovered fishing, and like you say, you were catching little brown trout with treacle parking. But of course, in London, well, I suppose things may be slightly different now with the re-emergence of the Wandle, but fishing opportunities on rivers were not that great. Yet you discovered something else when you were in London that again, was a great fascination for you.
Yeah, so I started off. So one of the first things I did when I moved down to London was I joined Salisbury and District Anglers, which in those days they were actually advertising for members rather than like how many years waiting list nowadays, I guess. And so that got me out. I lived in West London, so I could get out to the chalk streams in the evening. So I used to kind of bomb out of work at 5:30 and hit the M3, get out to the Avon, and then drive back. I can remember driving back at 1:30, 2 in the morning, and having to stop at Fleet Services just so I could close my eyes for a few minutes. One time I kind of woke up at 4:00 in the morning in Fleet Services car park thinking, God, where am I? I've got to go to work. So I did that, and that was really lovely, because I'd never really fished. I'd fished the Derbyshire Wye a bit, but I'd not really fished chalk streams before, so that was a good thing. And then I worked in Windsor for quite a few years, lived in West London. So I used to drive over the Thames every day on the way into the office. I used to drive over the Thames, and there was a little backwater next to it as well. And every time you just have to look over at the river, and I just think that looks so fishy. Yeah, never used to see anyone fishing it. Just there's got to be fish there. There's got to be fish. And in the end, I couldn't resist it any longer. So I bought a little inflatable, little kind of 10-foot inflatable and 4 horsepower engine, and stuck it on the river and went out with my fly rod and started fishing the weirs initially for pike. And this would be late 90s, probably late 99, 2000, something like that. And actually started catching pike on the fly. And just like that, at the time, I kind of didn't know anyone else who was doing it, and just fantastic. I was reading American books about it, and so it was just amazing that I could actually do this thing that I just read about in the book. And so catching pike, and then I used to, as I was I'd come back downstream to take the boat out I often used to see chub underneath the willows and stuff like that. And so I was like, oh, okay, need to do that. So took a dry fly rod with me in the summer. And that was, so I just used to have fabulous mornings where I'd get up really early and go up to the weir pool, catch some pike, and then drift back down and dry fly fish for these chub. And they were good fish. I had a few over 5 pounds. And they average, between 3 and 4 pounds. And it's all sight fishing, and getting the cast off quickly as you kind of drifted past them, and big bushy dry flies that they'd come out of bushes for. And it's just, and I never used to see another angler. You'd see quite a few early morning rowers going up and down, and you had to kind of watch out for. But I basically had, probably 5 or 6 miles of the Thames that wasn't being fished to myself. And it's, that was just amazing for me. Just a lovely experience of, when you sort something out for yourself and you're trying to work out the methods for yourself, and there's no one to watch to see how well to do it, and so you just have to work it out. And I found that immensely satisfying. Just loved it. Yeah. I wish I could kind of bring the Thames up to Scotland, because I think that is one of the things that I miss about being in Scotland, is that I can't go chub fishing and weirpool pike fishing on the Thames. Because that was just great fun. Loved it.
And it sounds like you were quite a trailblazer with the pike and chub. That's, and I've said apologies many times before, that, the interesting thing is that you couldn't connect very easily with people who were doing or thinking the similar sorts of things that you were. And it was very difficult to do that. And that fast track to success didn't come quick, because you had to figure it out, didn't you? So you couldn't post a question somewhere, you couldn't do whatever. So you understood deeply what you were doing and how you were doing it, that was logged away for the next time. And I find that still really fascinating. It's wonderful that people can pick up these other species now so much more quickly, because there's a wealth of information, which is really cool, because that encourages more people to do it. But also I kind of like, and I was having a conversation with somebody just the other day about guiding, and, as well, you'd well know, and I'm an absolute nightmare to guide. I'm not difficult or anything like that. I just need to go and do it myself, so that I understand. I want to understand why I've caught a fish, not say throw it there and, so it's I guess it is from those sorts of days that you figure stuff out for yourself. But, you say that you wanted a piece of London, or the Thames, sorry, I should say, in Scotland, but you did actually leave London and you moved to Scotland, and it was lovely that you said to me that you allocated time to get better at fly fishing. So how did that come about? What did you do, and where did you go to forward and propel your knowledge of fly fishing?
Yeah. So it's it was, if I'm honest, it was full on midlife crisis, Pete. So my partner had got a job in Edinburgh, and I was still working in London. And so we'd been doing weekend commuting for 2 or 3 years, actually, which was, it's doable, but it was no fun, really. And I was at a stage in my job that wasn't particularly challenging, wasn't particularly enjoying it. And I can remember thinking at one stage that, the 3 things that are important to me was my partner, who's at the other end of the country, job, not particularly enjoying it, and fishing, which I'm not getting to do much of because all my weekends are taken up traveling up and down the country. And I thought, this is no way to live my life. In fact, a colleague of mine, a really good friend of mine at work, she died, and she was just a year younger than me. And that was a real kind of mortality moment, I thought, where, the 3 things important to my life aren't working. Something has to change. So I resigned from my job to move up to Edinburgh. So that kind of ticked two of the big things. I've got more time to go fishing with my partner. And I thought, and I realized that I'm really, really fortunate at that time in being able to take some time out. And I thought, I'm not just going to jump straight back in to the kind of job that I was doing. And I thought, well, I'm just going to take the time to try and get good at what I love, which is fly fishing. And I think that it kind of all started a bit before that, where the Sexy Loops website had started, and I'd seen the results from the CLA Game Fair casting competition in trout and salmon, probably. And I can remember looking at the distances and thinking, I have no idea. I wonder if I could cast that far. And so I took my rod out to the local park in London and couldn't get anywhere near those distances. And that kind of intrigued me. And I thought, well, this is the pastime that I really love. And I want to feel like I'm doing it justice, and I want to get better. So really kind of got into the Sexy Loops thing and practicing my casting. And then that coincided with me moving to Scotland and had more time. And I met this guy at the local Orvis shop. He was working at Orvis then, called Ben Dixon. And he was on Sexy Loops as well. And he was like really keen on casting. And that was brilliant, having someone to cast with who was as keen and interested in the stuff that I was. And it's Ben's fault probably that I became an instructor, because he wanted to do his FFF and S-Kayak and all the rest of it and stuff. So he said, why don't you do it as well? So I was like, okay, I'll have a go. And that got us practicing. We used to practice in the parks in Edinburgh on the little boating ponds and stuff like that. Any spare time I had would go into casting. If I wasn't fishing, I was casting. And I think people underestimate you can get reasonably competent quite quickly. I think it's like a lot of sports, isn't it? You can get to a level of competence, but then it's diminishing returns. To get better and better, the effort that goes in gets more and more and more. So it took me a while, I think, to kind of get to a level where I was happy that I could try and be an instructor. And I think initially I just wanted to get good. And then once I went down the instructor route, I found that I was really enjoying the teaching side of it as much as the casting side of it. Just absolutely loved it. I think when someone comes to you and they want to learn, not because they've been told they've got to, but they're motivated to, and it's something that they're interested in, and you get to help them, and you see the look on their face when they thought they couldn't make a cast and they suddenly make it, and that's priceless to me. I think that is just so rewarding, and that's what kind of pulled me into it, I think. And I think it's a double whammy of, not only do I get to teach people and enjoy that, and I can cast better than I used to, but the enjoyment of my fishing has gone up as well. I think not only is it kind of less frustrating because you're not catching the bushes all the time, but just the aesthetic of seeing that line roll out and land neatly and straightly, or exactly where you want it to. It's just another dimension to the pleasures of going fishing that we've talked about already. It's just, it's kind of opened up a whole new horizon for me, I think, of different areas where I can enjoy fly fishing.
Fantastic. And it is interesting. And I know, I make no secret of the fact on here that the more you practice, the easier it is. I do understand that not everyone has the time or to allocate to go fishing. So just go out and enjoy it anyway. But if you do practice even 5 or 10 minutes, whatever that may be, it does pay dividends on the river. And, I've always said that if you can get your fly from A to B with efficiency, without spooking the fish, you're in the game. Now, I always believe that the fewer casts that takes, the better it is. And because I practice that, then hopefully I can do it relatively quickly. So there is a correlation there. We're going to come a little bit more onto something else that you said that was really interesting, and you've talked about the instructor side of it, but also the fishing side of it. And I know that when you moved up to Scotland, that you also travelled to fish to broaden your experience, your horizons. Where was the places that you went to? I know I hinted at a few in the introduction, but where was it you went, and what would be the standout for you?
Oh, right. So I fished. Where I fished? I fished in Montana on the Yellowstone and some of the little rivers around there, which was lovely. And doing a float trip was amazing. Actually, fishing from a drift boat is a bit mind scrambling, I think, where you're moving with the currents and how you manage the river and the speed that things go past you was just a mind blowing. And wild rainbow trout, big, healthy wild rainbow trout, just amazing, I think. And just the fantastic landscape and great people. Loved that. I did a few years actually around Cape Cod. So we went on holiday. My partner and I went on holiday to Cape Cod, and I had a day's fishing on Monomoy for stripers, which I really enjoyed. And we did a day trip out to Martha's Vineyard. I didn't fish, but I just loved Martha's Vineyard. And so the next year, I went back on my own to Martha's Vineyard for a week fly fishing. Again, I think I had one day guided fishing on a boat, but the rest just sorting it out myself, wandering around the island and going, "Oh, that looks fishy. I'll try there," and just had a blast catching striped bass and bluefish. And the first time I went was in September, so the false albacore were in. So catching false albacore off the shore was just brilliant. And they would come crashing into the bait right at your feet, under the rod tip. You're trying to get this kind of streamer into these fish that are like about 9 feet in front of you, and they're traveling I don't know what speed, getting a fly in front of them. But then you hook one, and I'm just amazed by 1 minute you've got this fish under your feet, and then seemingly just seconds later you can't even see your fly line in the distance. They've just ripped line off. And so that was lovely. And I went back to Martha's Vineyard another couple of times in the summer for striped bass and bluefish. And again, just lovely. And it's interesting just talking with you, Pete, that what I remember the most is trying to sort things out for myself. Trying to work out where I'm going to stay, where I'm going to fish, what kit I'm going to need. And then, just getting a map of the island and going, well, that looks like it could be interesting. And it's interesting because it would be 98. And I think Google Maps had just started at that time. And I can remember at work printing off a Google map of Edgartown in Martha's Vineyard and looking for these potential places to fish and spotting little inlets and stuff like that. And so absolutely love that. That kind of really kind of helped me with my saltwater stuff, I think. And again, doing those things just gives you confidence, doesn't it, to tackle new waters and that kind of stuff. Yeah. And I'd fished in Christmas Island a few years before that. It was one of the advantages of having a decent paying job was that I could travel a bit. So I went to Christmas Island in the mid-90s to catch bonefish mainly. Interestingly, in those days, most people just went for the bonefish, whereas I think now it's more known for GTs, and much more for the GTs, I think. But again, just that whole mind expanding thing that travel does to you, I think, of meeting new people in new surroundings and just, seeing beyond your immediate horizons. It's such a privilege, I think. And you just hope that, once we're past the pandemic, that people can get to do that more again, because it's such a great thing, I think. Where else? I fished a little tiny bit in Australia, up in the top end, Daintree River, and stuff like that. I never caught a barramundi, which means I've got to go back. I hooked one and lost one. I just had one day's fishing, and I caught some baby GTs. I caught archer fish and loads of other kind of weird stuff. Mangrove jack, they were good fun. But the one barramundi I hooked dropped off, so I've got unfinished business back there. Yeah. Where else? New Zealand. When I moved up to Edinburgh, I went to New Zealand for a month, and I think that was so I'd just come out of London, and I'd had a 20-year corporate life, being suited and booted manager on the career ladder, and I went to New Zealand for a month, and I mean the fishing. We don't need to talk about the fishing in New Zealand. South Island, you know what it's like. But for me, the biggest thing was the people that I met. And I suddenly met all these people who had just completely different lifestyles, were earning livings in different ways, and they were fitting their life around their passions and stuff like that. And that just was a real kind of recentering for me of, well, this is how I want to live my life. It's very easy, I think, when you're on the career ladder, that's your reality, that's all you see, and that's your horizon. And then you step outside that, and there's just a million and one ways of living your life, and all these people out there doing it. And it's once you see that, you can kind of choose. I think you're in a much better place. Again, I kind of don't underestimate how fortunate I am, having had a good career and, living in the right part of the world and all of that kind of stuff. But you kind of feel like you should make the most of it, I think. And yeah. And so I've never really gone back to the full-time career thing. I work part-time now, and the rest of the time is kind of teaching and fishing and trying to kind of build a life the way I want it, rather than on the career ladder side of things.
Sounds very, very civilized indeed. And like you say about New Zealand, that is where you will meet. That's probably the place that you will meet such a diverse group of people, yet they feel like you do. And, my buddy and I stayed in farmhouse B&Bs, yet we met people who were sleeping in cars and everything else that went with it. And of course, you've got the helicopter side of it as well for people. But there was such a wide breadth of people out there who felt like we did, which that's the one place, you can walk in Yellowstone or around the park or wherever it may be, and you'll see people in fishing shirts and stuff like that, which is also wonderful. Yet New Zealand just has that wider range of people who are going there for the fish of their dreams, which is really cool. False albacore as well. I think they're one of the most exhilarating fish I've ever caught, I have to say. And I've been lucky enough to catch some. And they were absolutely phenomenal and really, really amazing fun. So, I can see stripers are on the ever-growing list that still seems to never shrink, but they're there. But it sounds as though, the qualification, the experience, it was all going on in the background. And then I wanted to sort of take this in another direction, because I'm interested in what you've said about studying how people pick up physical skills. And I say this as I have in the past talked about instructors perhaps going into autopilot with teaching and not always noticing the needs of their pupil. Do you think that's a fair comment, that, there is a certain way to teach, yet sometimes the obvious is being missed?
I think it's fair comment, Pete. I think what I would say is, I think fly casting instruction is like any other field that you can imagine. There are some people who are absolutely gifted at it, and they just seem to be naturally brilliant at getting things across, and they do it really well. There are people at the other end of the spectrum who don't do things so well, and then there's the bunch of us in the middle that we kind of get some right and not others. And why wouldn't it be like that? That's just the natural way of things. I think for me, the biggest skill in being an instructor, and it goes to what you were saying, Pete, is your observation skills. And I think, you can be, there are some kind of groundwork skills that we all have to have technically. We need to be able to cast and understand how it works and all of that kind of stuff. But for me, the biggest thing is having great observation skills to know what it is you're seeing when you're watching someone cast, and also to listen to the person who's casting about what they think they're doing. What are they trying to do? Do they think they made a good cast, or do they think they made an awful cast, or whatever? But just having that a neutral mind that allows you to observe. And I think it's really tempting, and we've all done it. I've done it myself. You've just qualified as an instructor, and you've got all this theory in your mind and these views about what makes casting work, and you're just desperate to kind of get that out there and to use it. So the temptation to just dive in and give someone a fix, because
whether they want it or not as well.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. And we've all done it, and a lot of it is just enthusiasm. You've got all of this knowledge that you want to get out there. Whereas for me, the best teachers are the ones that will ask loads of questions. And it's a really useful. For me, one of the best questions you can ask someone is, well, what did you think of that cast that you just did? Because they might be completely happy with it. They might think they've just made a brilliant cast, or they might be, sometimes you get people and they think, oh, it was rubbish. And you're going, well, actually, it wasn't bad. And so finding out what they think and what they were trying to do before you dive in, for me, is the number one skill. And, I'm sure we come on to it. I spend a lot of time mentoring instructors. We run a course for the SGIAC qualification up here. And you can see people, when they come on the course, most of them need to improve their casting to get to where they need to get to. But the ones that you can see are going to do well, they get to that point, and then you can suddenly see that they're not only are they aware of their own casting, but they now got to a stage where they can watch someone else, and they can suddenly see loops, and they can see what's causing it, and that's where you think, yeah, they're going to get there. They're going to be good instructors, because they're suddenly in that observation and listening mode, which for me is just really, really important. And those are all the great instructors that you come across. They're all doing that. And I would love to have met Mel Krieger and people like that, because I'm sure that they would be all over that stuff. So it's a long-winded way of agreeing with you, Pete.
But it is the reason I bring this up as well is for listeners, because I've been getting, and given the times we've had, given the conversation we've had, that I get, and I'm sure you get thousands more, but I still get lots of phone calls from people saying, I really want to change my life. I want to be an instructor. I want to be a guide. It may be they want to do it full time. It may be they want to do it part time. And it is really important to understand that where you understand where your casting is, your ability, before you go down that route. And I had a friend the other day, is going to see a good friend of mine who's starting on that. And I said, look, do a little bit of practice. Just do some simple, pick up the line, put it back down again, and then work on some false casting. But I said the really key thing is off your other shoulder. And I've said many times on here, even for people looking to improve their casting, even if they don't want to be an instructor, sometimes you can learn a lot by teaching your non-dominant hand, your left hand, to cast a trout rod that way. And you learn a lot. And it's amazing when you put it back in your right hand again. And those sorts of silly little things, and we're going to come on some casting tips for listeners as well, but those sorts of things are kind of important to go into this process with open eyes, isn't it? And say, right, and be honest about where you feel about where your casting is, how long that process is going to take, because just because you're a good fisherman, and I've said this many times, so apologies, but just because you're a good fisherman doesn't mean A, you're going to be a good teacher, and it doesn't mean that you are a caster at the ability to pass those qualifications as well. So there has to be a little bit of looking in the mirror before going down that process, isn't there?
There does, yeah, and I think So I would say if you're thinking of going down the process of being an instructor, find someone to talk to, find another instructor to talk to who can look at your casting, and if you can find an instructor that's familiar with whatever syllabus it is you're going to go through, they'll be able to tell you where you stand and how much work you've got to do. Because I think that is one of the biggest challenges, especially the different syllabuses that involve spey casting. So SGAIAC, AAPGAI, and the Gaia qualifications as well. Often people, single-handed fly casters, can be really good fishermen and have lots of experience, but never have spey casted in their life. And where spey casting is part of a syllabus, it's a big part of the syllabus. And that is not something that you pick up in an afternoon. I wish it was, but it's not. And so I would say just, have an honest appraisal of where you're at. And they are all skills that you can pick up. You're going to have to work hard, though, I think. People underestimate how much effort it takes to become an instructor. Because I think you're trying to get good at casting, and B, you're trying to learn how to teach it at the same time. And people underestimate the challenge on that. I think having your eyes open before you go into it is really important. The upside is, as I said earlier, it's just massively rewarding. It's just on so many levels. And if you've got the time and the inclination to do it, then I would recommend doing it. And people become instructors for all kinds of reasons, and I'm kind of fine with that. If you just want to take the exams because you want to get good, and you've no intention of teaching, that's fine. That's kind of how I started. And we get quite a few people on our course who just want to do that because they've got some time and they want to learn stuff. They maybe just want to teach their son or their nephew or grandchildren or whatever. That's great. Knock yourself out, And there are other people who we get lots of gillies come on our course, or people who want to be gillies or want to be guides, and so they're mega focused on this is going to be their living, and and everywhere in between, and that's fine for me. There's no law that says you've got to have certain motivations to do this, and we're all different. But I think if you want to go into it with your eyes open in terms of what's involved and how long it takes.
Yeah, great advice. We could go on for this for quite some time, and I know you and I think it was Mark Surtees as well, haven't you? Have written a series of papers on the teaching process and the physical aspects of it. Do you want to just touch briefly on that to give people an idea, and if there is somewhere they can find that to have a read of it too?
Yeah. So the background to this, I think, is probably Mark and mine's initially painful experiences when we first qualified as instructors, which is going back, must be 15 years ago now. So you you pass your assessment and you out in the wide world, and you get your first few lessons, and strangely enough, they don't all go swimmingly. I think there's this myth that all lessons, if you talk to instructors in a public forum, all their lessons are going to be brilliant. Everyone goes away completely 100% fixed, and they're all star casters at the end of it. And it was a bit of a shock to, I think, Mark and myself that wasn't always the case, and that sometimes your finely honed analogy or way of teaching a pick up and lay down didn't work. And so why was that? Why does it work with some people and not with others? Or you do a lesson for someone and they would be, you'd really sort them out and they would be casting razor loops and just fantastically well. And then you'd see them in 6 weeks' time, and they were back to where they were before. So, I'd be patting myself on the back for that first lesson, just went fantastically well. But then why hasn't it stuck? And I think that's where both Mark and I independently initially were thinking, well, why is this? Why can someone pick something up in a lesson but it's not sticking? And how do people learn? And we both independently started researching around skills acquisition. And it turns out that there's just loads of stuff out there in the world of sports about how you pick up physical skills, motor skills. Loads of research about what works and what doesn't, and how you do this stuff that you don't hear about, and that instructors aren't generally talking about. And so we decided that we should kind of pull something together, and we wrote some articles for the Loop magazine, which is the FFI's the online magazine. There's loads of stuff out there, and we could probably speak for about 3 hours on this, Pete. But I would say one of the big things that I read early on, a great book called The Inner Game of Tennis. I don't know if have you read it, Pete?
I remember when it came out and listened to the interview with the guy on Radio 5. Yeah. I remember it and thought, I need to buy this book because there are aspects that are transferable here, and it's always sort of kind of been in my mind. And again, on this, I've sort of talked about, allowing that great sporting phrase, letting people express themselves. And I know in fly casting, as many other things, there are parameters that we need to employ, yet stepping outside of that. And my case as a cricket fan, I use Steve Smith, the Australian guy you can't even get out most of the time, who technically isn't correct, yet is absolutely fantastic. So that thought has always been in my mind. And like you say, that book, I've got to be honest and say, for some reason I didn't buy it, yet it started that process for me too. And it was written by a tennis coach, wasn't it? Who looked at
Timothy
the
Galway.
aspects.
Yeah. And it was really kind of seminal at the time. It kind of kicked off, it's kind of credited with kicking off the whole kind of sports psychology kind of thing. I think it was in the mid-70s, I think the first edition came out. But his thing, what I took out of it, was that traditional instruction is often about direct instruction to move your body in a certain way. You move your hand from here to here, from in our language, I guess, 10 till 1 or 10 till 2, whatever instruction is, and keep that elbow locked into the side and those kind of stuff. That's kind of traditional instruction. Whereas what Tim Galway was saying was, if you give people an objective, a kind of a more external objective to do, and in tennis, his big thing was, I remember reading, it's not just keep your eye on the ball. It was like, watch the line on the tennis ball as it arrives, have a lot of focus and awareness of the ball. And then people just self-optimize. If you give them the right cue, the right thing to look at and to be aware of, their body sorts itself out. And I can remember some of my early lessons where you'd start off going, you need to keep a kind of a firm wrist. And then your elbow needs to be kind of here, and it needs to go up and down 6 inches, and then rotate your shoulder. And by the time you've said all of that to a student, their mind is just fried because they're just trying to focus on too many things that is impossible in the moment. But if you just say, watch the rod tip and make it go in a straight line, 9 times out of 10, their body will do that. If their eyes are in the right place and looking at the right thing. Mark has a very good thing about, if you ask someone to pick up a glass of water and move it from a table to a bar, they can do it. Their eyes are on the glass of water. They're not thinking about how tight am I gripping it? What's my arm doing? They can just do it. And it's amazing how that works. And I it was funny how I did a club day I was working with Orvis at the time, and we did a club day where, had maybe 10 anglers turning up. And I thought, I just read, The Inner Game of Tennis and some other books. And I thought, I'm going to try and get through this afternoon without giving any direct instruction. All I'm going to do is ask people to notice things. And it was a bit of a deep breath moment for me, because you kind of used to kind of giving instruction. And it was amazing. It didn't always work, got to be honest, but the times that it did, where rather than telling someone, to haul longer or haul smoother, just say, well, I just want you to just notice what you're doing with your haul. Just notice what happens on that back haul, and don't tell them what the answer is, and that they fix it themselves. And the first time that I saw that, the hairs on the back of my neck stood up, because it was like magic. That just getting people to be aware of the right thing at the right time, and their body will fix it. And so for me, that kind of set me off on a journey of trying to work out, well, how do you maximize this? How do you build this into your lessons? And it's still something that I'm learning about, really. And I think what Mark and I are keen on is that this kind of stuff gets talked about more with instructors, because I think we're really good at the foundational skills of, the technical side of fly fishing and how a cast works, and, the 5 essentials and the biomechanical side and all of that kind of stuff. Brilliant. And you have to be good at that. You have to know that stuff. And I'd like to see us now overlaying that with what I would call coaching and instructing skills, which are about the stuff we talked about earlier: observation, how best to explain things, and how to give people the right cues. What is it they should be aware of? What should they be focusing on? And how do they build a good practice session? All of that kind of stuff, which at the moment doesn't get talked about, isn't part of the assessments in a meaningful way. And I think that we should be trying to codify this stuff, so that if you're interested in becoming, a better coach or a better instructor, you've got places to look, and you can go and read this stuff and do it. And I think, and it's not for everyone. If you're not interested in this stuff, then fine. But if you are, and you want to get better, then why not? It shouldn't take you. You often hear, I've been teaching for 25 years, and that's how I've learned what to do, and which is great, and we've got some fantastic instructors out there who are brilliant teachers, but it shouldn't take someone 25 years to get halfway good. We should be able to get to that quicker, I think. And so, I haven't got all the answers. I'm still reading, I'm still reading books and trying to work out what's right. But I think it's kind of conversations we should be having as instructors, because I think we're behind the curve versus other sports.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with you on that front. And, I've tried to touch on that a little bit more. And, I know we're going down a little bit of a wormhole here, but hopefully listeners will find this interesting if they've had tuition, how we're discussing it from the other side as the person showing them the cast or the technique or whatever that may be. And I think what you're saying is absolutely key, and lagging behind is absolutely key. And I know fishing as a whole and fly fishing is a tiny little place, but also the ability with people like yourself, I've sort of stepped out of it now, but people like yourself, you should be embraced by whatever organizations, and I'm sure they are looking at these things, but I think there is scope for that process to be moved on, like you say, rather than the book under the arm, that sort of movement, the whole aspect of it, and moving that on a little bit more. So thank you for telling us a little bit. As I said, I could talk to you for hours about that process. But as I've got you here and we're going down that instructor route just a little bit, it's coming close to the start of the season. What advice would you give someone looking to sharpen up their casting? What advice would you give them? What's the key tip that you'd share with somebody today?
So my number one tip which I would say, wouldn't I, is get a lesson. And I think that will be better than anything else that I can say to you now. Because I'm in my house talking to you, Pete. I can't see everyone's cast and where they're at, and what it might take to improve it. But I would say get someone to look at your casting, and it will be probably less than the cost of a decent fly line, and it will pay dividends for the rest of the season. And then practice. And you said it before, Pete, for some reason, and I don't know why it is, but for some reason, so if you talk to golfers think nothing of going down the driving range and spending a morning hitting balls. Tennis players will go and spend just hitting balls back. They're not actually playing the match. They'll just practice. For some reason, people expect to be able to pick up a fly rod, go onto the river, and be able to cast right across it without practicing. And I think and I say this to people that I teach, if there's one thing that I can do during a lesson, it's to inspire them to practice. I want them to feel at the end of a lesson that they can improve, because everyone can improve. I've not met anyone yet who can't. And then just get out and practice. Do the exercises that your instructor gives you. And that would be my number one advice. It would be get a lesson. If you don't want to get a lesson, and that's fine by me, then I would say first thing is really look at your loops. Look at the way the line unrolls and lands on the water. If you're not aware of what's going on with your loops, and watch the backcast as well, I would say. If you're not aware of what's going on with your loops, you can't fix them. And strangely enough, most people, when they're casting, aren't looking at anything in particular. They might be looking at the water or a tree in the distance. They're not looking at what's happening with the cast. And if you're not aware of what's happening with your casts, then you won't fix it. That would be my second one. But get a lesson.
Perfect. This is a loaded question because I know what your answer is going to be. What is the most important piece of tackle?
So for me, it's got to be the fly line. I think if you're, unless you're short line nymphing, which we could probably talk about as well, but I think if you're casting, then getting a fly line that works for you in the application that you need it to is number one. And it's amazing the number of times it happens a lot. Someone spent, best part of 800 quid on a rod, and they don't like it, or someone else picks it up and goes, oh, really, that was not as good as I thought it was. And the number of times you can fix it by just putting the right line on it, and it transforms a rod. And so I think it's vital. And I would always say, it's amazing how people start with the rod every time. And I'm sure people have said this on your podcast before. That seems to be the number one item that they're bothered about, is what rod am I going to buy? And for me, it's the reverse. I would always start with the fly and the application and what have you got to chuck. Get a line that will do that, and then find a rod that will cast that line that you enjoy. Do it in that order.
Great.
And I think we're really lucky at the moment. The breadth of kit and the quality of kit you can buy nowadays for reasonable prices is just astonishing. I have a relationship with Barrio Fly Lines, and Mike Barrio obviously is kind of known for his reasonably priced fly lines, and I use them, and I wouldn't use them if they weren't good. But always start with the fly line, and if you're going to invest money in anything, invest it in the fly line, because you will be able to find a good rod that will cast it, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. That's the great advice, and I can only echo, I think Mike's fly lines were, and we had them in the magazine actually. I wrote a list of 10 game-changing fly lines, and his was one of them. Yeah. I remember when they came to he was just either, as I'm sure you had them long before me, but the prototypes of them and everything else, and trying them, and thought, yeah, he's on something here. and a great guy as well. I went up to his old fishery when he had it at Hadio, and
did you?
I think he's a great guy. My aim, even in some tiny way with these podcasts, is that when I see social media forums, whatever, it would make me incredibly happy to see people not say recommend me a rod, recommend me a line. I'm fishing a small stream for trout. What sort of fly line? That to me would be a magical moment to see people starting to do that. So perhaps in some small, tiny way, we could get people doing that. But I love what you're saying about, work backwards from there. Have you, you've talked about the fly lines, and I know Mike has a wide range of those. What do you have? Is there someone who's still an inspiration to you, having gone down this path and experienced so much? Is there still some people that you sort of look up to that have been inspirational on your fly fishing? I'm using the word journey again. I feel terrible about that again, but on your journey,
it's unavoidable, isn't it?
Yeah. On your path, timeline, or anything else. Anyone that's sort of that you feel has been instrumental for you?
Yeah, I think so. I've always been a big reader, Pete. So, in fact, I attribute the kind of any reading and literature skills that I've got to the fact that I obsessively read about fishing from a young age. We used to buy all the magazines, all the books. So, from a writing point of view, Chris Yates, who his book Casting at the Sun. It's not about fly fishing, and I apologize for that. It's about carp fishing, but it's about a young lad growing up in the country and developing as an angler. And it's just beautifully written. And if you haven't read it, you should read it. That would be one. Arthur Ransom, we talked about before, Rod and Line, just a phenomenal fishing book, and just beautifully written. And then, like everyone else, I think, from the first time I read Trout Bum, John Gierak, in which I was living in London, so it would be in the 90s. I think I read it for the first time, and what a fantastic writer! I think his ability to capture characters and events without being flowery, and without being too, over the top. He's just brilliant at that. And I kind of feel at the moment we're in need of some more writers, some more really good writers. And I think what you do with the magazine, Pete, is great to kind of inspire people into doing that. We're always going to need instructional writing, and I think that's fine. That's always a need. But we could do with some more inspirational writers along the lines of these people, and I think magazines like yours are kind of what we need. Kind of give people an outlet to put this stuff out there and develop their skills. Because I think we all love great photography, and I think the photography in that we see nowadays is just awesome compared to when I was buying Angling magazine in 1977, kind of fuzzy black and white pictures, whereas now photography is brilliant, and I think we deserve the writing to go with that. And the more we can encourage great writers, that's a bit of a hobby horse of mine. I think we need more.
Yeah,
more writers.
I'm kind of with you on that, and thank you for the kind words. That's what we've tried to do, is discover and find new writers and give them a forum to share their work and pay them for it, which is really, really important to me as well, that they should do that, to give them the confidence to actually go down that route and say, actually, I can do it, and to help give a little bit of guidance along the way as well. And, it would be great. We've found some and I'd like to find more, and they're out there. And, I think everyone's got a story, even if it's the one article to say they've done it. It was a bucket list thing. That's fine by me.
Yeah.
If the writing, if I think our readers will enjoy it, then it goes in, and that's how we do it. So fingers crossed those things continue. But I'm just looking, we've talked for nearly an hour and 20 minutes now, and it's been, I could go hours more, but are you, looking forward to the new season? I think the answer to that is yes. Have you hatched a plan for your open day and how it's going to play out? And have you sort of kind of visualized it a little bit too?
So, so I'm going to be out there on my local river for salmon when that opens in February. And so looking forward to that. I need to get down and tie some flies for that. So that will be my first kind of big opening day thing. When the trout comes on in mid-March, I'm really looking forward to, I mentioned earlier, I've been tying these North Country spiders and getting back to this kind of upstream wet fly fishing, which I really enjoyed. So I'm really kind of looking forward to that. I've got a trip to Iceland planned in end of July, August, for trout. And so that's the kind of the big thing at the moment. And just my plan nowadays, Pete, is just to get out there when I can and just make the most of every season, because they seem to fly by quicker and quicker now. So you've got to hang on to them and enjoy them while you can. That's my main thing.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, I think that's a lovely place to stop, to say, to enjoy it as much as you can. And it's been absolutely brilliant talking with you. And I've loved learning about your fishing career. I think, and I'm sure there's members of all instructing communities listening to this. I think it's really key that they should be speaking to you now and saying, right, what should we be looking at? How should we be moving this on? And so if anyone is listening, please contact Will from these organisations and utilise him and Mark and the work that they've done there. It's been fabulous to talk with you, Will. How, if people want to get hold of you for lessons, if they want to talk to you about fishing, if they are from other, instructing communities, how do people get hold of you?
So possibly two easiest ways is I'm on Facebook. So you can find me on Facebook, and my website is lineslinger.com. That's probably the two easiest ways. Yeah.
Fantastic. Well, I'd encourage people to speak to Will about this. As I said, we've only really scratched the tip of the iceberg of, I think, what is a fascinating discussion that will probably continue when I've finished recording this. But I hope you've enjoyed this one as much as me. Will, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with me today. It's been absolutely brilliant.
It's been a pleasure, Pete. I really enjoyed it. It's been great.
Fantastic. Well, everyone, I hope you've enjoyed this edition of the Fly Culture podcast as much as me. As ever, there will be plenty more planned. If you are enjoying these, please, you might even consider leaving a review and giving us 5 stars. I'm told that helps. I've absolutely no idea why, but it would be greatly received anyway because everyone else seems to mention it. So that would be really, really cool. And thank you. And thank you for the messages. Thank you for people who have supported the magazine. I greatly appreciate it. And thank you for listening to the podcast. This is me signing off. And thank you for listening to the Fly Culture podcast.
The Fly Culture podcast is brought to you in association with Fly Culture, a quarterly print magazine. For more information, please visit flyculturemag.com. You can also find Fly Culture on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter.